Jane, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm fine, Maria. Thank you.
Super. So listen, I'm amused that your surname, it might just be me, that your surname is Gunn, but you have a family motto, which is it's either peace or war. So
Yes.
is there a relationship between your surname and your motto?
And the fact they go, well, not in the sense of a gun, although there is apparently a gun called a Peacemaker, which is another interesting thing. But Gunn is a clan, it's a Scottish clan. And of course, they're a bit of a warrior clan. So that's where their motto comes from, either peace or war. So there is a bit of a history there.
Oh, I'm learning. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. I like that. And it's
Mm.
interesting because you have become known as the corporate peacemaker to your clients.
Yeah.
And you've got the, as you said, the clan and the history. How did you get that name?
The name came from the Financial Times. They had a business review section at one stage, and I was interviewed for that. I didn't invent the title. The editor of the piece invented it, and he called me the Corporate Peacemaker, and I thought, having that. So it stuck.
It's very good to get that from the Financial Times. That's good.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, so I personally, I don't like conflict and I try to avoid it. You might wonder, really, being Italian, though, I do have a bit of a passion and emotional background, but still. But you say there's magic in conflict. How can that be?
Yes. So most people, if we start with what you just said, Maria, most people say, and most of my clients would say, their tendency is to avoid conflict. They don't like it, so they put their head down or they delay dealing with it. My point is that if you don't delay dealing with it, if you say this is normal, it's an inevitable part of life, it's an inevitable part of business relationships, let's acknowledge that it's going to happen. And then say, what's this teaching us? What are we learning from this conflict? What could we do better as a result of the fact that, we found something that's not working, there's a tension here. And that's the bit that we miss mostly in business and in life is, what are the learning points from something that perhaps isn't working as well as it might?
Oh, okay. That's I can see that now. I can see that.
Mhm.
And what kind of conflicts, if you're allowed to tell us, are you brought in to deal with, or are you finding in organisations?
So I deal mostly with business conflicts. I don't do divorce, but I do family business and family issues. But it's a broad range, really. I'm more of what you call a general practitioner in mediation terms. It can be anything that affects people in business. So it could be employment disputes, boardroom disputes, partnership disputes, as I say, family business disputes, disputes where somebody's left a business and is setting up in competition, all kinds of things like that. And I have also dealt with disputes in the medical sector in, for example, clinical negligence, that kind of thing, or professional negligence, those kind of things. So it's a very broad range of conflicts that come to me.
And have you seen a rise of conflicts because of what we've been through in the middle of this pandemic and this crisis?
There is now, and I'm actually running a webinar tomorrow because what we're seeing is a rise of conflicts in the workplace because people are not quite sure what's happening when they go back. Some people don't want to go back into the workplace. And of course, in the boardroom, those decisions have got to be made. Are we making people redundant? What's the business going to look like as we go forward? And not all the directors agree about those things. So we're seeing conflicts in the boardroom and in partnerships about how do we make the decisions about what our business looks like going forward and how do we manage our staff through this.
So Jane, when you're brought in, are you brought in, for example, with a board to act as the mediator, or are you teaching people how to mediate and to disperse the conflicts? Is it both?
Both. So I was trained as a mediator, and as soon as, well, first of all, I was trained as a lawyer. So my initial training was as a lawyer, then as a mediator. And then I'm thinking, well, it's this whole thing about the magic of conflict. There's a window of opportunity, from the moment a conflict starts to the moment it ends up at a sort of deadlock point. What could we do even earlier in that window to help people to manage their own conflict? So I do teach them, what are the principles I work with as a mediator? Could you use those in your business yourself? And if it's a little bit too late, then I can come in as a third party and actually help them.
And actually, it strikes me that the skills of a mediator actually are really important in business. But I mean, I'm rarely asked for it as a bureau. I'm rarely asked for mediation skills. I might be asked for communication skills. How do they vary? How would you say mediation varies from communication or negotiation? What is that a mediator needs to be able to do?
A mediation is it's a process. So, yes, it includes communication skills, it includes negotiation, but it's a process that includes all of those things that helps people who are in conflict get from the stage that they're at and go through this process of understanding what are the issues, what are the needs and interests, what are some of the options. So we go through a whole process of unpacking the conflict and then working out how do we make the decision. So it's a whole decision-making process that comes out of that, which is a little bit more than just negotiation or communication skills.
So it's a bigger area then. So if there's a process, I could learn that process.
Yes, so you could learn that process. I teach that process, and in fact, I'm in the process of developing a process of developing a teaching that's much more for ordinary individuals, not people who want to be mediators. Because I've usually taught others who want to be mediators, but I think we should all incorporate mediation skills, as you say, into our businesses now.
So you wrote a book with a very interesting title, and it was How to Beat Bedlam in the Boardroom and Boredom in the Bedroom. But actually, I think there's a very important message underlying that, isn't there? That you say that often if there's conflict at home, you might then see it reflected in the workplace. So how on earth do you deal with something like that? If somebody's got conflict at home, you can't interfere there, can you? You can only act in the workplace, can't you?
Well, one of the things I do is conflict coaching as well. So the conflict coaching is, I might be working with a chief executive or even with a number of people from a board. And what I was finding is that often they'd say to me, yes, I've got conflict with my colleague, but I've also got conflict going on at home with my teenager, and that's taking my attention off my work. And they'd say, and I would say to them, it's the same skill set. It's the same things that you need to learn from me to help you in that context. And those things are impacting on one another. So you have to resolve all of it. And the other thing is that most conflict, whether we're in the workplace or whether we're at home, comes from inside of us. So if we learn the principles of conflict and what it actually is, then we can resolve it, whether it's at work or whether it's at home.
I personally like the idea that everybody should have some mediation skills training. It sort of ought to be part of the curriculum so that I think the world would be a nicer place. What's your views on that? I'm sure you agree.
No, I do agree. And one of the things that some of my colleagues have done and I have taken part in is taking this into schools. So we have started with quite, early years teaching and they are brilliant at it. At such an early age, they haven't developed all these sort of tactics and techniques that we as adults do to avoid conflict and so on. So they're very good at it. And we really, really should be, building it into all of our different stages of education.
Is there also a problem, though, of not always recognizing that there's a conflict? Are there signs to look out for, or maybe that you can look out so you can sort of preempt it?
Yes, there's lots of signs, and I think we do recognise them, but I think, as you said at the beginning, we ignore them. We think I'd rather not have to deal with that. So we can sense tension in a relationship with someone else. We can see behaviours in the office where someone sort of stops being quite so collaborative or starts sort of sabotaging work efforts or not working so hard and morale goes down. You see those things, but actually finding what the root cause is takes a bit more digging, really. So sometimes, what an organisation will do is a wonderful team building day. That doesn't get to the root cause of what the issue was. And so what we're avoiding is, what was the root cause of this? What's not actually working? And a lot of the efforts that people make in workplaces are not tackling conflict itself.
That's interesting, actually. So when somebody's thinking about running a team building exercises, why are you doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose one of the symptoms of conflict could technically be lack of collaboration. It
Yes.
might not be the fact that you're siloed or working remotely, or it might actually be that there's some conflict going on.
Yes, absolutely. And I would hope there is, but it's, what we need to do is three things: accept that it's there, acknowledge it, which means, understand it, and then actively manage it. And to actively manage it, you need to have a process built into an organization which says, here's a thing, and here's the process we've all learnt to manage it. And most organizations don't have that.
And should every leader be the mediator, or should there be somebody who's detached from it? If there's a conflict going on between a leader and a member of the team, for example, should a third party be brought in, or should the two try to resolve it themselves?
So that's a very good question. What I suggest for every organisation is that they have a process built into their organisation, which is a step-by-step process. So yes, at the beginning, everybody ought to be able to have that face-to-face conversation with their colleague. But if that's not going to work or it breaks down, then they should know what's the next step. And in most organisations, the next step is, oh, right, let's escalate it to a senior member of staff, or let's put it into a grievance process, or let's even go to litigation. So the next step is an escalation. What I'm saying is have a next step which involves then perhaps a neutral third party. So mediate that, bring someone else in to help you with the dialogue which has broken down, rather than go to an adversarial process, which is grievance or litigation.
Oh, that sounds so good. I like that. Avoid some of the arguments. So, okay, so this is a bit of a jokey question, really, for you. But I know people who can start arguments in an empty room. You know the kind. So,
I do.
do you want to have that kind of person in an organisation? Do you want to resolve what's going on with them, or have you perhaps got to get rid of them? That's, I suppose, a bit too general, really. Maybe I don't know, but there are people who are litigious. They really are. And is that a mistake to bring those people in, or are they? Can you repair them?
I don't know. I mean, it depends, and there's all sorts of questions that go on about what's really happening with someone. But I think you don't want to have only yes people in your organisation. Sometimes people who are, you know, are a bit disruptive or a bit agitators are a good thing, because they will be, as long as their intention is not to sort of overturn the whole thing. So yes, they have to be managed. On the other side of that, your question is, sometimes there are people that you can't patch things up with. And certainly in my early years as a mediator, I used to think, oh, my job is to come in and make everything nice again, but it isn't. Sometimes my job is to come in and say, actually, this person doesn't fit here, they need to go. But if they can go in, you know, in good grace with good terms, then that's better. If everybody recognises, hey, this doesn't work, you don't fit, rather than everything explodes, that's a better way for it to happen.
Fantastic. So I can see that we're going to have probably quite a lot of conflict as we go back. At the time of recording, we're beginning to open up from lockdown. And I can see that there's going to be a couple of scenarios where we're going to see conflict, where people who've been furloughed are now coming back into the business, and maybe the people who haven't been furloughed have been working like crazy, and the rested, suntanned people are coming back and they've been paid to rest and have a suntan. And I can also see a situation where people are coming back and then being told, actually, there is no work for you anymore.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you can give to leaders and how to handle that?
Yeah, we're covering this tomorrow in a webinar. I think there are going to be some difficult conversations. The first thing leaders have got to do in the boardroom or in the partnership is agree between them, because otherwise the tension is there in the organisation. It's stemming out of the leadership because they haven't actually agreed what their strategy is, and be very clear why they're making people redundant, whether that's the right thing going forward. Then they've obviously got to have difficult conversations with the people they're making redundant. And the thing is, I think you've got to be absolutely clear about what your intention is, what your reasons and intent are. You know, again, don't avoid the difficult conversation. Don't avoid having the clarity in that conversation and sort of text or send an email. Have a proper face-to-face conversation. Explain what's going on, explain your reasoning, and explain how you might be able to help that person going forward.
Oh, fantastic. I like that, the last point, that you to help them, to have some kind of resource to help them. So finally, Jane, there will be people who are at home and they've been stuck at home with their partners for weeks, and there's a bit of conflict. And as you say, you mentioned the teenager earlier. I'm sure there are a few teenagers who are desperate to get out, and parents. What advice can you give us at home to keep things, to mediate, to keep things calm?
I think we all need to have our own space to start with, and I think sometimes we get on top of one another, whether we're in the workplace, at home. So I think, you know, respecting people's space is important, and their need for that. And, you know, I think the need to have honest conversations and the skills to have those when you need to. And none of us is perfect. You know, I think I've been locked at home for several weeks as well. So I think we've got to recognize sometimes when we need to take a break from things and take some time out, or we need to have a conversation, or is there, as you say, is there a root cause, is there something niggling away at us that we really need to resolve? And I think what many people will have found of many weeks at home is, you know, there were some things that were niggling away anyway that need to be talked about, and perhaps those are the things that you need to have a conversation around, or read How to Beat Bedlam in the Boardroom and Boredom in the Bedroom.
Actually, that's a really good bit of advice. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jane.